Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Today we are very fortunate to welcome Hassan Joudi, who will be speaking to us about our mosques achieving style and substance. But we'll begin with the recitation of the Holy Quran. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أقم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا ومن الليل فتهجد به نافلة لك عسى أن يبعثك ربك مقاما محمودا وقل رب أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعل لي من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا وننزل من القرآن ما هو شفاء ورحمة للمؤمنين ولا يزيد الظالمين إلا خسارا وإذا أنعمنا على الإنسان أعرض ونأى بجانبه وإذا مسه الشر كان يئوسا قل كل يعمل على شاكلته فربكم أعلم بمن هو أهدى سبيلا ويسألونك عن الروح قل الروح من أمر ربي وما أوتيتم من العلم إلا قليلا ولئن شئنا لنذهبن بالذي أوحينا إليك ثم لا تجد لك به علينا وكيلا. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation. Brothers and sisters, Hassan Joudi really doesn't require any introduction. I'm sure all of you know him very well, but I'll give you a little bit about his background anyway. He's the Deputy Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. He was actually elected at the age of 28 as the youngest ever elected office bearer to the MCB in 2018. He leads on the organising of MCB's mosque-related projects, including Visit My Mosque, which I'm sure you've all heard about, and the annual Our Mosques Our Future conference. Hassan believes passionately in the role of young people as a driving force for positive change in society, and he works as a chartered engineer, a mechanical engineer in the energy sector. Please welcome him, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you, Kumail. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all. Thank you for having me this evening, and a pleasure to be with those viewers who are with us virtually, live, and of course in this day and age we know many people won't be with us live, but they'll be catching up or they'll be watching a recording, whether audio or sound, later, so welcome to those as well. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious and the most merciful. I've been asked to share a few words with yourselves tonight, and the topic that I've chosen is our mosques achieving style and substance, and you can just see the slides pop up in front of you just now. Those of you who, if you're only listening to audio only, you might not benefit a huge amount from this presentation because it's quite slide heavy. So you may want to think about an opportunity if you want to watch this with the video on, because then you'll benefit as more from it. Style and substance, I'll come on to kind of that title in a second, and its relevance, or kind of form versus function as it's sometimes referred to as well. Quick outline, I'll give a brief overview, and then I'll talk a little bit about context of mosques and the role of mosques in British Muslim life today, and some debate and discussion around that. I'll touch briefly on style, and when I say style, I mean architecture or building design, etc. But then the vast majority of our time this evening together, and I hope that in the Q&A and discussion that it'll inspire or spur some questions and some discussion, is around the substance. And what I mean by that is like you see on the slides, outreach, community service, you know, the doing, the end, the product, the output, you might say in one way, of our mosques as institutions. And then we'll end by just a brief touching on, you know, what does it mean to be a 21st century mosque. As was mentioned in the introduction, I'm involved in a lot of the mosque-related activities of the Muslim Council of Britain, and I've been very fortunate since I've been involved in the MCB, since I graduated from university back in 2014, that I've had the chance to visit many mosques up and down the UK, both big and small, new and old, purpose-built versus renovated, and such a wide and beautiful spectrum, and I've been very blessed to have that opportunity. And I've tried in this presentation to, I guess, share a selection of photos that I've come across and that I've taken myself personally when I've been on my travels up. You know, the most northern mosque I've been to is in Aberdeen, and the most southern is down in Plymouth. And all over the place you see great, fantastic examples of best practice, of innovation, of just some really interesting things that you think, oh, I wouldn't have thought someone in a mosque might have thought of doing that, or running a service that way, or designing an activity for the local youth or the local elderly in that particular way. And a couple of examples of poor practice that I'll share with you as well, because of course we have a lot to do to improve. and a couple of things that might make you laugh. So I hope this presentation will, at the very least, make you smile or laugh at one or two things. But at best, I hope it can inspire those of you who are listening or watching to, with some new ideas, fresh ideas that you could perhaps implement in your local mosque, or, tell or share with somebody who volunteers or works at a mosque near you, so that we can all help each other to improve our standards, inshallah, and ultimately our service for the community. So let's begin. Bit of an overview. If this was a normal presentation where we were in person together, I'd kind of throw the question out to the room. How many, there's a little table here that you can see. How many churches, how many mosques do you think there are in the UK? And I'd ask for a show of hands and people. We're not quite here yet in terms of the chat function and things like that. But I thought an interesting one, just so we can understand the landscape. And most people who I share these numbers with, they're quite surprised actually at the numbers. Other people aren't so much, because it's what they expect. Everyone's different. But oops. Oh, the numbers aren't showing here for some reason, so that's my mistake. There's about 40,000 churches in the country, about 2,000 mosques, about 250 synagogues, about 200 or so mandirs, 200 gurdwaras, and about 100 other minority faith places of worship. And just for a bit of context, there's a couple of numbers there on the right-hand side about number of pubs, number of schools, number of leisure centres and gyms in the country, etc. But just focusing on mosques, there's about 2,000 mosques in the country, big and small, from your Cambridge Central Mosque, large kind of multi-hundred thousands capacity, to your small converted terraced house, backstreet mosque in a corner of Blackburn or Leicester or London. A bit of context as well. And of course we know there's the architecture side of it. There's the inner space, the spirituality, that aspect of things. And of course, then we have the social, the congregational aspects of things as well. And especially with Friday prayers or Eid, opportunities in the year for many in the community to come together. But even the smaller daily prayers, the social aspect of and the role of mosques in our lives, of course, is a big aspect of it. I'm just gonna, if I can, maybe just pause and ask the host. I think these slides might not be the right slides. I might need to just switch and share a PowerPoint on my computer, if that's okay. I don't know if the host would allow me to do that. Okay, just 1 second. I'll just do sharing screen. Okay. And I'm not sure whether you can see that screen now.
I think it's loading. Yeah, we can see the screen, but it doesn't come up as full screen, but we can see it.
Just give me 1 second. Hopefully it comes up now. Yep, is that okay?
Perfect.
So you can see the full screen, yeah?
Yes, we can see the full screen. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Apologies for that. So, and if I just move to the screens, can you see that okay as well?
Yeah, the animations are working fine.
Perfect, yep. So a bit more on context. So there's kind of quite a few articles in the press in recent years, recent months, about kind of the changing role of mosques in our lives today. And there's a couple of references here for those who are interested. These slides, by the way, there'll be a link shared at the end, and it'll be on the YouTube description as well for those of you who'd like to kind of download and have a look at these slides in your own time and click on the links. There's a recent article here in the New Statesman about the changing shape of Britain's mosques, not just physically, but of course inside. Of course, our imams and the role that they play. There's a fantastic ongoing research at the moment, a study at the University of Cardiff called Understanding British Imams, which is going to be coming to fruition later this year or early 23, and it's going to be very interesting what that reveals about the changing roles of imams. And this particular article in The Economist recently was about how young Muslims challenging the old guard in Britain's mosques. And also lots and lots of discussion always about, the dome minaret. Do we need a dome minaret? Do we not? And this particular study, suggesting that they are good things, and others saying no, it's about being in Britain and we don't have to have mosques and domes and minarets, etc. And they're not an essential part of mosque architecture. And that debate will continue. I put the title on this slide as Prayer Space Plus, and this is also another interesting article for those who've got time or would like to look more into it. It's Professor Sean McLaughlin at University of Leeds, entitled Mosques in the Public Space, Conflict and Cooperation in Bradford. It was a couple of years ago, but he's got some very interesting findings, and there's just one quote that really struck out at me that I wanted to pick out and share with you, where he says, and I quote, "So while primarily being places of prayer and devotion, since the 1980s at least, some mosques in Britain have also functioned as advice centres for the unemployed, MP surgeries, homework clubs, youth centres, elderly care centres, space to prepare foods for communal gatherings, weddings, etc., etc." And obviously, for those of us who are involved in mosques as volunteers or as part of who regularly attend the mosque, that's not a surprise to us. But for many who aren't perhaps as involved, then that might be more surprising than one would think. And that's why perhaps Prayer Space Plus, and that's actually the kind of a bit of a hashtag in terms of a theme that we had used at one of the MCB conferences, hashtag More Than a Prayer Space, is about trying to tell that story of how, of course, our mosques play a huge amount more, contribute to local society and civil society, that base function as a prayer space, but then so much more, as this and many other examples show. On this topic of purpose, and again, just to kind of paint a picture and give some more context here, again, I'd really highly recommend you to check out a very interesting, this is on YouTube, a presentation given entitled "Who Needs a Masjid? The Past, the Present and Future of British Mosques" by Dr. Abdul Azim Ahmed at the University of Cardiff, where he describes many things, but he's got this slide which kindly given me permission to reproduce in this presentation, where he talks about the diversity of purpose of places of worship. And then he gives the example of course, if we think for our Christian neighbors, when you use the word chapel, something immediately comes to mind, something relatively small. Then you use the word church, something else might come to mind. And then you use the word cathedral, something, of course, much bigger, much more symbolic, much more, architecturally, comes to mind. And so there's kind of in the language, when referring to the place of worship as a building, or in the Christian faith, you've got kind of a bit of a flexibility in the language: chapel, church, cathedral. And in his presentation, Dr. Abdul Azim asks, well, what if we could potentially, what would this look like if we applied it to the Muslim faith, to mosques? And he offers a few examples, and I'll just jump straight to the point here. But there's, on the smaller chapel side, musalla, house mosque, prayer room, especially kind of in the university, Islamic society space. And then on the other side, kind of the cathedral mosques, the Jama'a masjid, or other words that are sometimes. And then there's a whole shades of grey in between, that many different, depending on perhaps your predominant ethnic background of a particular community, whether they're South Asian, whether they're from the Middle East or North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, might use different words. They might use the word masjid or center or Americas and many other things. But it kind of just gives you a flavor for, those 2,000 mosques that we spoke about across this country, obviously approximate. It can be a very small mosque, maximum capacity up to 100. It can be very large. It can be one which was started only 2 or 3 years ago, relatively new, immature, developing its processes, procedures, service provision to the community, or it could be a very historic mosque built in pre-World War II and been almost a century, for example. But yeah, it all has to be captured in this one word, mosque, which in that context is quite inflexible. Because unless you then delve into and try to understand, well, what is that mosque, and the word mosque itself doesn't tell you straight away. But perhaps in coming years, maybe our language will evolve to allow us to explain the different flavors of mosques, the diversity of mosques that we have across the country, in more nuanced ways. You can't do a presentation about mosques without mentioning at least a bit about architecture. It'd be criminal not to. But I promise this is only one slide I have in this whole presentation on architecture, or style, and then the rest of it will be about substance. This, for those who haven't seen, this is a very one of the largest mosques in the country in Bradford, Jamiat al-Sufa Masjid. From an aerial view, of course, beautiful in many ways and has a very interesting history. Another mosque which is very interesting and architecturally significant, but in a different way, Again, if this was a live presentation, I'd ask for a show of hands if anybody has seen this particular mosque or knows which one it is. But this is in Aberdeen, northeast Scotland, called Masjid Al-Hikma. Recently opened in 2018, but I was fortunate enough to visit it when it was coming towards the end of construction, whilst I was doing some work in Aberdeen. Very lovely community of active Muslim community in Aberdeen, and a group of young professionals who drove this particular mosque forward. And what's interesting about this architecture from a style point of view is that it's got this kind of grey, kind of granite silvery color. And for those of you who know Aberdeen, you'll know that it is nicknamed the Granite City, because a lot of the buildings, the houses, the offices in Aberdeen are built from this kind of grey silver granite from the local quarries in and around Aberdeenshire. And this particular mosque and the team there wanted to incorporate that kind of essential Aberdonian aspect into the physical construction of the mosque, and of course combining it with that kind of architecture. The mosaics, etc. This is another interesting example of a mosque. This is Eastern Jami'ah Masjid in Bristol, and obviously some very kind of colourful, and the road that's on has got its own very unique history in the centre of Bristol. And of course, we can't talk about architecture without at least mentioning the Salam Centre here in northwest London, and inshallah soon to be constructed and completed. One slide, of course, does not do any justice at all to the architectural side of our mosques. It's a huge injustice, but it's not the focus of this presentation, but I thought it wouldn't be right to not mention at least some interesting, unique examples. And of course, there are many more that I don't have time to mention today. And there is a very interesting book, for those of you who haven't come across it before, called British Mosques, a Social and Architectural History by Shahid Salim, which also goes into this in a lot more depth. So, on to substance. And there's a couple of words there, I guess, just to give you an idea of what I mean when I say substance. And this is very much for discussion, there's no right or wrong answer. And what's going to follow, I'm going to go through these quite quickly, is basically a selection of photos of where I've come across some examples where I thought, you know what, not many mosques actually do that, or actually that's interesting. Maybe some other people who I know might benefit or might be inspired to do something similar in their mosque by seeing that. So we'll begin, and then I hope this can spur some or inspire some interesting questions or comments in the discussion section at the end, inshallah. So by theme, welcome at the door. It goes without saying, of course, whether it's your house, whether you run a shop on the high street, making your front door as welcoming as possible is so important. Why no different for our mosques? This particular mosque has a lovely example where there's actually two things interesting about this particular photo. One is the fact that they're advertising an open day, which, and you might not be able to read it because it's in very small print. This particular mosque does an open day once a month, I think every Saturday afternoon, 2 to 4. Visit my mosque day, open day, etc. And that's their way of just telling the local community that we're an open space, and you can come anytime, but we'll also have a bit of a mini organized open day session for you at least once a month. And number two interesting thing is that they actually advertise it. How many places of worship, how many mosques do you see who have boards or signage outside to publicize not only their public events, but other things which they want the local community to know. Also, going on the theme of outdoor information, signage, again, we'll have notice boards on the inside, but let's be honest, a lot of people will just walk past on the main, especially if you're on a main road, the busy footfall, and only a fraction of people who will come inside, except those who have come with the intention of coming to the masjid. So why not have a notice board outside? Obviously waterproofed, etc. This is a particular mosque in North London. It looks like a library because it used to be a library, converted building, converted to a mosque, and they've got a nice notice board outside, which is information about what the mosque is doing, etc. And I thought, lovely idea that, to be honest, I haven't seen many mosques across the country in the UK do. This is just beautiful, I think, in terms of obviously a nice sunny day that I took this photo, but also the trees, it just looks welcoming, basically. And sadly, we know that not many of our mosques, there are some mosques that we may come across where at the front door it looks not quite as welcoming as beautiful as this. I did say that it's not all going to be good photos, but I will mention a few examples of what I would describe humbly as poor practice. or things that we can obviously do better. I've kind of grayed out the name of this particular mosque, and I won't mention it specifically, but first things first is, who chose the pink? Obviously, if it was up to me, I wouldn't paint a mosque pink, but to each their own in terms of the painting the brickwork. But no, the main thing about this photo is the sign. It's old, it's grey, it's dirty, it's rusty, it's got ivy growing over it. It's not very welcoming. And number two, and a personal, I think, opinion of mine is that's actually blocked out, but there's a non-English language at the top and then English underneath it, and in my opinion it should be the other way around. Islamic Center of something, and if you want to put your name for your mosque in Arabic or another language underneath it, fine, but it's important that we communicate in the first language of the UK, which is of course English. And obviously this is not the ideal first impression that one would want to make. And another example, what building is this? Well, sadly this is a mosque. Does it look very welcoming? Not particularly. Would you walk into this building at night? I'm not sure I would. Doesn't look very welcoming, to be honest. And aside from being poorly lit, etc., and boarded up windows and poor signage, and the simplest things I think can make a big difference. Moving on, cleanliness. You may laugh at this. Well, one of the first things, of course, that many of us will do when we walk into a mosque, for want of a better phrase, we take off our shoes, and the shoe-sock transition, for a better phrase. And maybe it's just me, maybe I'm a bit OCD about these things, but it really gets me frustrated when it's not quite organized in a very nice way. And I was quite, made me smile to see this particular mosque, nice big sign, no shoes beyond this point, very clearly. Take off your shoes there, pick them up and put them on the notice board, and they've even gone to the effort of putting some little stickers on the floor to emphasize that. And another interesting example that I came across, so for very small mosque, actually, this one in Lancashire, in a bit of color coding. So you walk in, red is for dirty, shoes only stay on the red, take your shoes off, put your socks on the green, pick up your shoes and put them on the notice board. So put them on the shoe rack. So I don't know whether that would work in every mosque, but hey, I thought someone's thought about it, so someone else is as OCD about these things as I am, perhaps, and that made me smile. Wudu area. I mean, aside from being quite architecturally well designed, this particular building, this particular wudu area from a style point of view, but functionality, it's functionally designed well in terms of space, in terms of your soap and the water and the drying units, etc. This is another interesting example. This mosque, again, I think in some kind of cultures, I think in particular in some parts of the South Asian subcontinent, some people do prefer to dry their hands with towels rather than kind of with the air dryers. But of course, we know that if you ideally shouldn't be sharing the same towel amongst many people, which some mosques unfortunately still do. It's not very hygienic. So this particular mosque, you've got a bank of clean towels. You use one, you put it underneath, and then that gets sent away and cleaned and in the washing machine and brought back later in the day. Some of you may have come across this. For those of you who follow football, you'll of course know Sadio Mane, one of the best football strikers, not only in the world, but of course he plays for Liverpool. Any Liverpool fans in the room, you're having a great year. But there was an interesting story a couple of years ago of where he was pictured cleaning or helping to clean the mosque and the toilets and the wudu area at his local mosque in Liverpool. And there was some interesting press coverage about it. And only the day before, he was scoring a goal in the kind of big Liverpool versus Leicester match. And I think it just reminds us that no matter how important we think we are, whether we're a superstar or a billionaire, or whether we are a humble citizen, then there's nothing that should stop us from prioritizing cleanliness. And after all, as our hadiths tell us, it is half of our faith. Creativity. I'm going to go through this quite quickly, and if hopefully there's any points of discussion or questions, feel free to pause at the end. Obviously, artwork and around the mosque corridors, etc., which is quite a nice idea. This is a photo from the outside on the main road from Finsbury Park Mosque in northeast London, where I mean, number one interesting thing about this is their rebrand. So they did introduce a new logo a couple of years ago, which I think is quite nice, quite colourful, quite innovative. And and many stories behind that, and they've got a big sign with the verse of the Quran and regarding nations and tribes, Surah Al-Hujurat, verse number 13 in English. So very accessible. People walking by the street are getting a message, getting a dose of this is what this mosque means to the community, and you're welcome inside, etc. In terms of signage inside, I found this this particular sign a nice idea. It's a bit of a reminder to switch off your mobile phones before you start your prayers. Environment, of course, just a couple of months ago, we've had COP26 up in Glasgow, and it's important that we emphasize and that we see what role can our mosques play in this. So even as simple as we've got water, then you've got water, use it, don't abuse it. Simple signs that you can put up in the wudu areas to remind people to be sparing in their water usage, sparing if you've got towels, for example. This is Glasgow Central Mosque, encouraging people to minimize their usage of towels when they're drying their hands. It's simple things, but it makes a big difference. Another, it's not for every mosque, but if you want to install solar panels on your roof, but tell people about it, what your mosque is doing, and it inspires them to also encourage them to do more. I think a big thing, especially when it comes to the month of Ramadan, let's be honest, drinking water, refillable cups, this is a common sight. Bottles and bottles of water, often half drunk, unfortunately, at the end of an iftar, just left all over the place in our masjids, unfortunately. Now, I'm generalizing, of course, many masjids are much better at this, but many, unfortunately, have a long way to go. And, what can we do? There's lots of simple things that we can do to minimize this unnecessary usage of single-use plastics. I think this particular photo was from York Mosque in 2019, where they bought some branded water bottles and encouraged their congregation to use it. I think also to take one for a £2 donation and to use it during iftar. And of course, they put a drinking fountain in the mosque to encourage people to do so. These are not hard things. These are very simple things to do. It does take a bit of investment at the beginning, but at the end of the day, if we're not investing in these things and we keep on using the bottles, etc., then what does it say about our commitment to the environment? And it doesn't have to be one of those water machines, but even the tap with the drinking water, etc., and a simple sign as well to encourage people. This is from East London Mosque. Again, and they also had the branded bottles, and they encourage people to use it during and beyond Ramadan as well. And for those interested, there's a bit of a link to a video there which tells a bit of their journey on how they did that, and a couple of other mosques that have done the same, and helping us in our journey to reduce and hopefully make images of unused plastic bottles like these in our mosques, hopefully part of history. Community outreach. When you see this photo of a couple of cricket players, you might not think mosque straight away, but this particular photo is from an annual interfaith cricket match between imams brought together by Lancashire Council of Mosques up in Lancashire, and between Blackburn Diocese and priests or clergy at Blackburn Diocese. And I think it's they only started to do it a couple of years ago. And it happens every year. Even during COVID, you can see in this photo here, they were social distant and they all still came and they played together. And I think it's just a very beautiful example of outreach doesn't stop at the walls, the four walls of the masjid. It's about, how can we take our what our masjid means and the people and its resources out beyond as ambassadors of our faith to all parts of society, including the cricket field. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, I'm told the Imams did win by 69 runs in this particular match. Visit my mosque days, of course, goes without saying. I mean, this is the opposite now. Rather than going out, inviting people in, and at least once a year, something like this is absolutely essential. And a lot more resources at the Visit My Mosque.org website, which you can see there. Anyone know which this mosque is? This is Edinburgh. Central Mosque, again, has very significance architecturally, but also just if you flip around 180 degrees from where I took that photo, you look the other way, then you're pretty much right in front of the one of the main entrances for the campus at the University of Edinburgh. And basically the street which this mosque is on has an immense footfall, not only of local people shopping and going to work in central Edinburgh, but students. And right next to the mosque, what do you have? Mosque kitchen. and a cafe. And this is one of the very busy at lunch times, very frequented, especially by the local students wanting a cheap sandwich and a cup of coffee. And I think just a nice way of making the mosque, people aren't coming to the mosque, but they're coming to a mosque kitchen. But there's a bit of a connection there, and it helps to break down barriers. Edinburgh Central Mosque also do a community gardening project, which I found quite interesting, and there's a bit of information there. Whatever, whether you're a beginner or an amateur, all are welcome. Join us every Saturday, 10 till 12. Down in London, so this is an ambulance, but it's not just any ambulance. This is a private ambulance, mobile outreach units, I think is the correct phrase to use, and it's sponsored by the community at Palmer's Green Mosque in Palmer's Green in North London. And again, an example of the mosque going out of its way to engage with other partners in the local community to purchase an asset which will not only benefit local Muslims in the area, but everyone who needs the support of this unit in the local area. Coffee mornings is another big one, of course, and some mosques are very proactive in doing these kinds of things, and this is just another example of them advertising it. Again, it's having that signage on the outside to show people what you're doing and what you have. But we know, of course, in post-COVID, it's not just about what you put on the outside of your mosque and inside the four walls, but it's about how you're reaching out in the virtual world beyond, and this within your mosque, having the accessible social media channels, your QR code that people can just swipe on their phone and they can join your Facebook page, your WhatsApp channel, your Telegram channel, whatever it's going to be, is absolutely essential. And this is a good example of that. And it's really simple to do once you've got them set up. Right, let's talk about youth and children. Youth clubs, of course, especially on a Friday night. This one is, I can't actually remember what age group. This is 10 plus, I think this one is. And they've got different, obviously, for boys and girls. And these are the absolute basics if we want, of course, our teenagers to spend their time, make friends, engage, new activities, etc., and have the mosque as something part of their life, not just something that which they come to once a year for Eid, or just when their parents bring them, but it's something that they actually want to, and once that come to meet their friends, to play table tennis or whatever games are on, and so that when they grow up and when they become adults and more independent, and it's not just their parents dragging them somewhere, then they'll put up their hand and say, hey, you know what, on a Saturday afternoon, I want to go to the mosque. And it becomes something that they want to do rather than being forced to do by their parents. And unless we have activities and initiatives like these, then that just isn't going to be happening in the volume that we needed to. Some other examples that we've seen as well, I think it's debate clubs, I think, are really interesting, and one that I don't see enough of, but I think they're not that hard to do, and it really engages youth in terms of public speaking and in terms of current affairs. This is an interesting one for the younger children, but treasure trail, madrasa themed, and just different things to make children and youth have fun at the masjid. It's as simple as that. Again, social media, having your bit.ly links, having your QR codes, these are not hard things to do. And of course, what does it look like? Games nights, etc., futsal, table tennis, tug of war, anyone? I can't remember what this one's called actually, but I wouldn't mind doing that. Perhaps not at my age, unfortunately, anymore. These are a couple of things that are run by a very great group called the Islamic Network. And for those mosques that don't have their own internal youth committee or youth team, then these guys and girls can come along and they can help you to organize things for the local youth in your community. And I think it's a really interesting model and something that we may be seeing more of in the coming years. Mosque, this is Palmer's Green again, and a bit of a photo of some young boys and girls finishing a public speaking course. And as part of that, they got the opportunity to go up on the mimbar of the main masjid area and give a speech that they had practiced, which I think is a lovely idea. And forget the confidence building aspect of it, but how many of us can say that we had the opportunity to do that when we were younger? But and it really gives them something to go back home and to tell their parents, tell their friends at school, etc. And these are just some more photos. Again, this is the Islamic Network that I mentioned earlier, working with Palmer's Green Mosque. And Palmer's Green Mosque is a fantastic example because they've just got so much going on all the time. And even on their notice board, you walk in, they've got Wednesday, this is happening, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, etc. Unfortunately, many of our mosques are only busy one day of the week on Friday, or they're only busy in certain times of the year, like Ramadan or Muharram. But we need to be thinking about, well, look, there's 7 days of the week, 12 months of the year. How can we maximize and utilize the space that the physical space that we have for the benefit of the community? Going down a bit younger in the age groups, this is a photo of my son attending his first Friday Jum'ah prayers. He's just a year and a bit. I think he was more interested in the toys at that particular moment in time, but I promise you, he did listen to a bit of the lecture, the khutbah, I mean. But what can we be doing to make it more family friendly in terms of the toddlers, both on the gents side and the ladies side? And there's simple things like baby changing facilities. This photo is from a relatively new mosque, and I mean, it looks all brown, shiny, etc. But unfortunately, you see these in shopping centres, you see these things in airports, but I've only seen them. I can probably count on one hand the number of mosques that I've seen that have washroom facilities with baby changing facilities. And so, if you're a parent and you've got a toddler, and it's nappy changing time, what do you do? Ideally, you don't want to be doing it on the top of the toilet seat, but unfortunately many of us have to do with that, and that reduces the accessibility of our masjids to young parents of young children. This photo, but sadly, of course, not all mosques have those, let alone even have facilities for children, but they'll even encourage you not to bring children, and obviously an example of poor practice. This particular sign was taken before COVID, by the way. So obviously we understand during COVID, many mosques, it was recommended to minimize or to discourage young children from coming because, of course, you can't be guaranteed to socially distance. But before COVID, this particular mosque was encouraging people not to bring children under the age of 7. And it's a shame, obviously. It's sad to see that this is the mentality that still exists in some of our institutions. So how are those children going to build or develop a connection with the mosque when they grow older? Obviously, we're still, the COVID pandemic is still with us, so it wouldn't be right to do a presentation about masjids unless there was some mention of the amazing work that so many have done in terms of educating the community around the new behaviors that we've wanted to adopt because of COVID, in terms of being on the front line, thanking the NHS, thanking other frontline workers for their services. And this is a particular banner from Waltham Forest Council of Mosques in East London that they help their local mosques to put on their railing, etc. And of course, going forward to the vaccination program, and so many countless mosques across the country being on the front line and opening up their venues and engaging with the local NHS trusts, etc. And this is, I've only got one slide on this, but this doesn't do justice to the huge amount that mosques across the country have done as part of the COVID-19 efforts and keeping their communities and wider society safe and secure from COVID. Health and fitness, bicycle racks. Interesting, of course. I mean, again, one of the things that aren't hard to do, but if you build it into your plans from early on, then it is possible. And this is a particular one where the West Ealing Islamic Centre, where they got some small funding from the local authority to install, and there's a bit of a photo shoot there for the local authority magazine. In case you ask me why the bicycle rack is in the shape of a car, I don't know the answer. I thought we were trying to reduce car usage. You'll have to ask that one to Ealing Council, but it's a principle. Barking Mosque, this is their website. They've got a fantastic range of activities, from archery clubs to boxing to it's yoga. There's so many things, and it's accessible. You can go online, you can book, you can sign up your kids, you can go with adults, etc. And just a link there for those who want to know more. This is their center manager in one of their videos. This is one of their archery lessons for ladies in the multifunctional gym area that they have. And this is a boxing session, all happening right next on the same sites as the mosque. And multi-purpose, multifunction rooms such as these are fantastic because you can use them for so many different things. But then when you have peak events in the year, like Friday or Eid, then obviously you can move all the equipment, you can roll out the temporary carpets, and it turns into it becomes an extension of the prayer space. And overflow for your Friday or your Eid Jamaz, your Eid prayers. Right, boring stuff, but absolutely essential and important: finance, governance, transparency. I quite like this, to be honest, and I'll be interested to hear what others think of this. Having on your notice board a very simple summary with the monthly or the yearly expenses of this mosque and how much it costs. They're not cheap, especially the bigger the building, of course, the more expensive the heating, the lighting, etc. is. And being transparent about that and sharing that with your community so that they know where their money is going when they're donating, I think is valuable if done correctly. Also being transparent in terms of who runs your mosque, and put some photos there. Tell people that this is your leadership team. This is how you can get involved. This is how you can volunteer. I don't see many mosques, unfortunately, do this, but to me, this is the bare basics. An opposite example, again, I've hidden the contact details here, but this is what I would maybe suggest as an example of how not to put the contact details for or who runs your mosque. It's one person, the center director. It's a mobile phone number. It's not a landline. It's his, or it's his in this case, personal email address, and not a mosque official website email address. It doesn't look professional compared to this. Being cognizant, of course, having proper policies and procedures in terms of anyone, nobody should just come and leave some booklets or leaflets or whatever without it being checked and approved by the committee or whatever policies you have for putting things on display is absolutely essential. Let people know how to get in touch with you. Let people, if they're unhappy, have a suggestions box, have a clearly marked, put out sign that says this. If you're unhappy about something, get in touch, don't keep it to yourself. Donations, of course, we are moving towards, especially the younger generation, we're moving towards a cashless society. Of course, still keep the cash donation boxes for those who want to donate via cash or coins, but do not waste any time in moving towards having the contactless terminals. And there's many different types out there, but it's well worth the research. Put some basic sign, this particular mosque here, put some signage in different community languages to tell people how to use it. But once you've used it once, it becomes relatively easy. And put it in accessible places. Don't hide it in the corner. Put it right in front of people's noses, so that, and don't just have one unit, have multiple units, so that you're really getting it out there and encouraging people to give. And one example I came across of how not to do contactless donations is to hide the machine in an office. And to put a sign saying, if you want to donate, speak to someone and we'll bring the machine out for you. Very few people, you've lost 90% of your donations, if not more, by not having it accessible. It's got to be there, it's got to be convenient, it's got to be in a corridor, it's got to be at the entrance where someone can just come on their way out, they're putting their shoes on, take their debit card out, swipe, away they go, and they're given their £2-3 sadaqah for the day. It has to be accessible. There's history, there's heritage, and there's few examples, and I think too few, but I hope growing in the coming years, of where many of our mosques are only 10-20 years old, built in the 90s, but many are of course much older, built in the 80s, 70s, 60s, even pre-World War II. And I think preserving those stories, preserving those and that heritage for generations such as today who are growing up, and of course who didn't live during that, is extremely valuable, and it helps to give context to where and how far communities have come. This is a nice example from York Mosque, where they've got a little timeline of the construction phase of their mosque, kind of from inception and from beginning of construction through to then putting the roof of the building and the dome, etc., and the opening. I think it's just very nice to put that on display. And people can see, well, this is how this community came together to fundraise to support in the establishment of this building. Which mosque is this? This is Green Lane Masjid, but in Birmingham, in Small Heath. But this was formerly a library and swimming bath in the 19th century, in Victorian times. And it's a very historic building, and the mosque has been very much on top of keeping and preserving and highlighting its history, and how much of an integral part of the city of Birmingham it was, and how the mosque now has rejuvenated the use of the building to the extent that they've won some local awards from conservation societies that in terms of the work that they've done. And another photo here, very well deserved award indeed. And even simple as going on their website, they've made an effort on their website. You can go and you can check out, here's a history. Of course, the building is in this case grade 2 listed, and it has a particular status and a particular importance there. But even if it isn't, all of our buildings have, especially those that were not purpose-built mosques, but that were renovated from other buildings, they've got interesting histories, and I think it's important to preserve and to tell that story to the current and future generations. Just really quickly, some of you may have come across the East London Mosque and the archives that they have over there. So this was opened a couple of years ago, I think 2017 or 18. East London Mosque, of course, itself, its history begins in 1910, and the archive that was opened a few years ago has finally made accessible a catalogued collection of many of the most interesting and fascinating documents from the over 100-year history of East London Mosque, including, it's the minute books from back in the day when everything used to be pen and paper and you didn't have computers and Microsoft Word and Excel, etc., and typewriter letters between the mosque and between, London Transport regarding issues to do with, local buses or the local tube or Whitechapel station, and photos of when they were full to capacity and people were out there praying their Friday prayers, etc., and Eid prayers out under the stars. And in the basement of East London Mosque now, you have the strong room, which is a fully designed and to specification archive storage room, where they're storing that in flood proof, etc., and all the rest of it, with the intention of preserving these paper records for centuries, inshallah, in the future. And this is what it looks like, and it has capacity for storing the archives and the records, etc., of other organizations and messages in future as well. There's a really interesting guide put together by an organization called Everyday Muslims called Preserving the History and Heritage of Muslims in Britain. I do recommend that you check that out. The link there for those who want to know more. And I'm sorry I have to go back to ending how we began, but on shoes. Again, let's be honest, how many mosques do we go into and you see that? Not great first impression, but I assure you it can be done, and it can be done well. It's partly signage, but partly reminding and educating your congregation. But signage can do a bit. This particular mosque I found quite amusing that they had this sign on the door. Sorry, on the wall of this area, but you just flick to the left a bit and you take another photo there, and that's what you get. So for all the signs that you put, you're not going to tell. Not everyone will listen, and it's about educating the community that put your shoes in the racks, please. And finally, but not least, the Imam must have some respect. So for his car. There were obviously some kids that were really got on the nerves of this particular person, but he or she went to the effort of actually putting a sign, so good on them. And if you're ever looking for a spare fridge, then this is the mosque to come to. 30 quid, pretty good to be honest. Si Rashid or Al-Tayyib in this mosque foyer. I like the way that someone in passing has just thought it was fine just to put a prayer mat or a sajjada on top of this particular fridge. I'm glad to say that this fridge did find a new home after a couple of weeks when I went to that mosque a couple of weeks later. But yeah, next time probably put a photo of the fridge on the notice board, but don't bring the fridge itself into the masjid. And we'll pause it there. So I guess just to conclude, it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Apologies, it took a bit longer than planned. Lots of different photos, lots of different examples of, I hope that I've shared of some good practice, some examples of innovation, some examples of something a bit quirky, but perhaps overriding message. There's no one right way to run a mosque. There's no one way to say this is the best way to do things. It's constantly evolving picture. It's constantly changing. And the more that we're talking about these things, the more that we're sharing best practice, the more that we are encouraging people to say, well, at the end of the day, these are our mosques, it's our future. How can we make sure that we're making these buildings not only busy on one day of the week for Fridays, but busy 7 days of the week, and really delivering value for the community as community hubs, as pushing forward around social cohesion, around educating, around the madrasas, and so much more services that our mosques do. It can only be for the good. And just going back to the beginning with that slide that I had with the 2,000 mosques, etc., it naturally is going to be a spectrum. And it's really important that those mosques that have excelled, they find spaces that they can share what they've learned and their knowledge with those who are on their journeys to excelling, inshallah. And for those of us who see mosques and those of us who may sometimes get dejected or may sometimes say, oh, why can't they do it better? Or, oh, that's just not great. I would say don't lose hope. We are on a learning journey. Nothing can change overnight. And inshallah, together, the more that we talk about and that we share these things, the more that we can truly say, mosques, it's not, of course, it's about style, it's about beauty, it's about the architecture, it's about the domes and the minarets. Of course, don't take that away. But it's also about the substance, and it's also about the community outreach, the services, the education, being highly transparent, the governance, etc., etc., etc. So I hope that at the very least I've made you laugh, but at best I hope that you've been inspired to take a few examples forward for your local mosque, or to share something with other people that you know who volunteer or work at their local masjids. Thank you for your listening. I look forward to any questions or comments that you may have. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Hassan. That was a really quite broad in terms of how much you covered, which is amazing. And there's definitely lots for us to all learn. Anyone who's listening, of course, can talk to us as part of the executive committee to try and improve ourselves. Again, please let us know. But there's so much there. Thank you so much. There have been some questions come through. So the first question is on the YouTube chat, is from Nizar Uncle. It says, with your visits to various mosques in the UK, can you recollect examples of 24/7 open mosques, if any? As the Salam Center project evolves, we have a choice of making the prayer area only accessible 24/7. And do you think that's a good idea? Do you think there's a need for something like that? We'll have to obviously think of ways for access specifically. But I think basically it's around what have you seen and what works well, if that is something that you have seen.
Yeah, it's a very good suggestion, actually. Just thinking back, abroad, yes. In the UK, no. Interestingly, I haven't come across any 24/7 mosques. Is it a bad idea, or is it possible? Obviously, we've got 24/7 gyms, we've got 24/7 supermarkets. There are advantages to it if you can get the security aspects of it right, and if you can get the logistical aspects of it. So, is it beneficial? I think, like everything, it's probably down to forecasting, the needs of your community, and if there's a big demand from the community to have it accessible 24/7, and people may want to use it for, early hours of the night, or to tahajjud, or other things that they may want to use it for, then, I see no reason why, if it's not massively expensive, I see no reason why we can't make that accessible to them.
Thank you very much. So, and the other questions that have come through. So, there are so many features that you have shown which illustrate ideals for mosques. Is there a resource where all of these ideals are sort of put together and shown for mosques, I guess, for mosques to take on board?
So it's one of the things that we're working on at the Muslim Council of Britain. We produced a few guides recently. I didn't touch on security today. I mean, there's so many topics that I could have touched on today, but just for lack of time, I couldn't. But security, in terms of CCTV and locks and windows, etc., is one that I didn't touch on, but we've recently produced a guide on that. I touched a bit on environment and sustainability and eco-friendly, but there's so much more that can be said, and we produced a guide a couple of weeks ago. This is all available on the MCB website, mcb.org.uk, and we are developing a portal on the website, which is currently in beta, Mosque Resource Portal, mcp.org.uk/mosque, where we've put together a collection of useful resources to date. But that's still a work in progress and it's still growing. But certainly take on that suggestion of how we can make such resources more accessible for the community, inshallah.
And does the MCB go to specific individual mosques, or I mean, to focus on the work which they've done and sort of share best practices specifically with either mosques which have requested it or mosques that others have raised with as having issues? Is that something which is done more individually rather than having material which is obviously useful for a wide range of mosques together?
A bit of both, to be honest, Kumail. So sometimes we get approached by a particular mosque that say, hey, you know, I've been arranging one thing that, again, I didn't have time to discuss today was, you know, many mosques will do open days, for example, on a Sunday or a Saturday, a Visit My Mosque Day. But then during the week, Monday to Friday, they'll also host school visits. And, you know, primary or secondary school, you'll have a group of 30 kids come for half a day as part of their RE, religious education lessons, and there's a particular tool that the masjid will provide for them. And, you know, we've been approached by a couple of mosques to say, hey, we've been doing this for years. We want to help other mosques do this. And so that's kind of an example of people coming to us with suggestions, and we try to work with that and then see how can we integrate that with some of our existing resources and programs. But then no, the other way is sometimes you know, you put something out there, you hear that people might find something useful, you do some research, you put something out there, and then people will engage with that and they'll see and they'll benefit from it and they'll give you feedback to improve.
And the mosques which are sort of developing and change. So obviously, the Islam Center is an example of a way that we're moving forward with creating a new place for all of the activities that we're hoping for. Obviously, other mosques also trying to develop their own ways. Do they approach the MCB to ask for ideas in terms of what they should be doing and how they can put something which is good for their community?
You know, for those communities who are at that stage of, you know, development, of redesigning, especially their physical space, I think naturally people who are in that, they're keen to get ideas from lots of different places. I think the primary place you should be getting ideas from is your local community who are going to be using the center. But obviously, my experience of those communities are that they're already quite proactive. They'll come to the MCB, they'll come to others, asking and looking for ideas. I think another thing which I would say I notice, actually, I lost my trail of thought. I'll come back to that one.
Fine, great. So it's another question. These are really important ways that mosques are currently run. How do you see things changing over the next 10 to 20 years in terms of development of these ideas?
Ooh. So I would say we're at a bit of a crossroads, and you know, in terms of British society as a whole, I think there's been a couple of recent interventions in terms of, you know, the Kruger report and others that have really tried to emphasize the immense value, social value that places of worship provide to society, especially in the, you know, for churches. Many churches are also finding, you know, uses as food banks, etc. as well. There was an interesting report, I think, late 2020, if I'm not mistaken, called House of Good rather than House of God. Kind of told and it kind of really captured a lot of the efforts that many churches across the country had done in the COVID response. And, you know, the MCB, we also had a report in November 2020 capturing a lot of the Muslim community's response as well, and telling the story of how many mosques stepped up, etc. I think over the next 10 to 20 years, there is, and going back to something that I mentioned a bit earlier, it's about prayer space plus. No one's going to take that away, that core function, and you can see the photo behind me for those who recognize this particular mosque. This is Azizia Mosque in North London, Stoke Newington. That will always be the bedrock. But I think the mosques that will innovate, that will excel, that will multiply their value to society and to their local communities, will be the ones who successfully have those parallel activities, number one. Number two, I think the next generation have, I would call, quite different expectations of what they expect from not just places of worship, but just generally. Let's be honest, and especially now with COVID, the current generation who are teenagers, they're growing up. They have never grown up in a society that's never known a mobile phone. They've never known growing up in a society where you can't just flick out an app on your phone and order a pizza, or whatever. And so if we are not thinking like them, if we're not thinking about, well, how is my mosque going to be accessible on their phone, on the internet, in terms of social media, etc., and then how does that link in with the physical presence and with the physical in-person services that my mosque provides, then I think we're going to be struggling. And it just touches on the whole, I mentioned the contactless donation piece. Obviously, that's only for people who are, coming. The footfall, you need to be capturing them, because a lot of people are cashless, or moving towards cashless. I didn't even touch on the donating online. A large fraction of mosques, a large proportion of donations towards mosques can and should be coming without someone even setting foot in the mosque, from the mosque's website or from your app, where people can just click donate, etc. So I think those are some of the key themes of what's going to be changing in the next 10 to 20 years, and many of them are the same kind of similar changes that we're seeing across other sectors of society, from business to the workplace to schools, etc.
Thank you. COVID has, of course, had a really big impact, particularly with online engagement. Have there been any specifically outstanding examples that you have seen which have worked well? I don't know if you have managed to have a lot of contact with lots of different mosques for this answer.
Yeah, I think all of us are. I think it probably goes the same across society. All of us are struggling with finding, or what does being a mosque, being a place of worship, delivering mosque services in a hybrid world mean. I think some good examples that I've come across are, so it's simple things, but if you think about it, you've got 2,000 mosques, say, in the country. That doesn't, and what's happening with the sharing. So, for example, if we've got a Friday evening lecture like this, if every mosque wanted to do that, do you have to have 2,000 Friday evening lectures? Well, no. If you wanted to combine and to share and to rotate the effort and the organizing time, well, no, get together with a number of other mosques, whether it's local to your region, or that share your same school of thought, or that share something else similar to you, and you rotate it around. And if it's 4 of you, for example, then you just organize your one once a month, but it's the same live stream that goes to all the other mosques. That doesn't stop the other mosques from still doing something in person, and they can still have that social aspect, the tea, the coffee, etc., but they're watching a screen, and others can watch from the comfort of their own home. So I've seen a few examples of that, but perhaps not enough. I think another thing that I've noticed is so the videos. So a key part of, and even offices, by the way, they struggle with this. You have some office meeting rooms that are set up to have hybrid meetings and hybrid, half people on Teams or Zooms, and others are, but others aren't. And so having those audiovisual, not just something that you bring out on a tripod every time, but having the video fixed on the wall, it's all hooked up. You just have to come in, press a button, and everything's there. It's worth investing that time, because it makes it so much easier to then host and run a hybrid event, and it becomes part of your regular routine. I've noticed a lot more mosques investing in that, and I think that needs to become bread and butter. Just like a mosque has a minbar, a mosque needs to have a fixed video and audio that it can deliver its online services as part of a hybrid service.
Thank you very much. I think that as we're approaching 9:30, I think we will stop there, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Hassan, for coming and presenting and giving so many ideas for us to think about. I'm sure that us as a team will probably be contacting you to find out more about your research, because it's really very interesting, especially as we're trying our best to do what we can for our community, but also because of the plans for a centre which we want to be ideal for our community as well. There's lots which we can learn from you and from the work that you've done. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and also for coming to present it. And inshallah, we will ask you again to come and let us know what you think about what we've done so far.
Thanks for having me.
Right. No problem. Brothers and sisters, just to let you know about our upcoming program. So on Sunday this week, so in 2 days' time, we will be celebrating the birth anniversary of Baby Fatima alayhi salam. The main talk will be by Sheikh Ayub Rashid. The program begins at about 7:15 with Quran recitation, followed by a qasida, and then the main talk, which will start at about 7:30, and the program will conclude with ziyarah. Next week, we are starting what was going to be a 3-part face-to-face, but now we'll start with an online first part of the series by Dr. Imrani Pandwani. So he'll be having a monthly talk on the last Friday of each month for the next 3 months, and that will be entitled Constructing Prophet Muhammad's Journey of Revelation from the Quran. And part 1, which will be next Friday on the 28th of January, will be entitled Whether or Not He Could Read or Write. So that will take place online at 8:15. And inshallah, following on from that, from the beginning of February, we are hoping to start our programs back in person. So we look forward to seeing you then, and we look forward to welcoming you again online on Sunday, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Muhammad wa Muhammad salawat.